Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We will learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We will also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening.
The essence of an ERP system is to keep the business operational, improve productivity, and maximize the value that employees and system could bring to the business. But what are the things you shall be paying attention to when selecting a new ERP system? And beyond that operational expectation, what consideration you shall have post-implementation, such as data analytics, reporting, and data governance? For the answer to all these questions, we have Malcolm Shroff to share the role of governance and data governance to achieve them when selecting and implementing a new ERP system. Malcolm Shroff is the Chief Financial Officer of Essence Group. Essence Group is an Australian-owned full-service contract manufacturer, distributor, and innovator of industrial goods and infant nutrition. I asked Malcolm about his recent nomination of Governance Top 100 finalists for this year and had Malcolm share his advice with those who want to excel in this area. We then spent some time talking about what Essence Group does in terms of contract manufacturer. We then move on to discuss his role as a CFO for a mid-sized enterprise here in Australia and what success he found in using data analytics in his department. Malcolm also shared with me his thought process of selecting and implementing a new ERP system. We then discussed in detail how governance and data governance play a role during and after the implementation of the new ERP system. It includes, but is not limited to, how and what to do with the data coming from the new and old ERP system. How different departments shall ensure the data mapping is correct. How reporting and data analytics can continue to function. If you are a C-suite working for a mid-sized enterprise and soon face the decision of implementing a new ERP system, this is the episode for you to consider all the factors related to data analytics and other aspects during and after the new ERP system. If you have any question for Malcolm or myself, make sure you send us an email or message on LinkedIn. This episode is sponsored by us at DDA and the Analytics Show. So wherever you are listening, follow the link in the description to join our first ever giveaway to win 1,000 Dogecoin. No risk, no anxiety, no worries. Just enter, share, and stand a chance to win the ever-growing coin. It is a perfect way to start your journey into crypto without fear. We will follow Elon Musk to the moon. Last but not least, make sure you click the subscribe button before the interview starts so you will be the first to be informed on the latest episode on how business leaders run a high-performance organization using data analytics. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening. Hello, Malcolm. Welcome to the Analytics Show podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today. How are you?
I'm good, Jason. How are you?
I am good. Thank you for asking. Now, I'm going to start this about the nomination that you have recently. I know and learned that you were nominated as one of the Governance Top 100 finalists for this year. Congratulations. Can you tell me more about this nomination?
Sure, Jason. Thank you very much for that. Essentially, the nomination was done by a company called Three Owls, which are based in Queensland. And they are essentially a governance advisory firm, that's started off this program in the year 2020. So this was actually the second year. So I was nominated last year and this year as well. So they essentially recognize, governance and finance leaders within the industry see, where those sort of professionals have, sort of advanced in terms of their professional development. And based on their skills, experience, and what they have so far achieved, nominate, the relevant top 100 finalists. So they undertake a certain, I think, so screening procedure, as you would like to call it, before they announce the top 100 nominees.
Fascinating. Now, for those who strive to be an expert in governance, what advice would you give to them?
I think so. The number one thing for a governance leader would be, to make sure that you're very methodical in your approach, be it your thinking, your analytical ability, the way you present yourself, or even the way, I think so, you sort of lead, and the way you sort of discuss things with your peers, your team, and your external stakeholders.
That is great. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the governance, especially the data governance aspect of it. Now, moving on, please share with us a bit about Essence Group Sydney, where you currently work.
Sure. So Essence Group is a proprietary company which is based in Sydney. We've got our headquarters in Greenwich, and we've got our manufacturing facility down south the coast, around 2.5 hours at South Nowra. So we are a contract manufacturer of nutraceutical and food and beverage products. The company was incorporated in around 2008, and it's been up and running since then. But over the last 3 to 4 years, the company's had a trajectory of rapid growth and rapid product development. And hence, I think I saw the opportunity for myself to move from my previous role through to the current role that I am in now. The opportunity was actually quite fascinating for me, in terms of, taking a company from where it is in its growth journey to where it wants to be. So that's what actually got me really engaged and involved with the business owner. And that's how I actually came on board last year. So I actually started with this company in September last year, just a bit over a year now.
Fascinating. I think for the listener who are not familiar, can you explain what is contract manufacturer? And I think some people who are in Australia, they're probably surprised that we still have manufacturing in Australia.
That is correct.
Must be surprised.
I think it's a pleasant surprise, because I think it's actually quite important in the supply chain as well as in the broader economy, because a lot of organizations don't really manufacture, in the key hubs, so big cities. But the manufacturing actually does occur in the regional areas, and that's not only important for the regional economies that those companies, sort of undertake the manufacturing activity in, but it's also important for the supply chain within those regional economies, because it actually helps sort of act as a catalyst, and it has a multiplier effect on those local regions or the economies that those companies engage or are sort of manufacturing in. So what we do is essentially we manufacture for other organizations, and we also have an arm of our organization where we actually manufacture our own branded product.
Wow. Any particular focus or the product that you guys at Essence Group manufacture?
So we engage with customers for nutraceutical products, sort of dairy-based products, food and beverage products. So we'll be supplying to customers like Melrose, all the big nutraceutical companies out here in Australia.
Right. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the opportunity that you pick up at the Essence Group, and tell us a bit more about your role as the Chief Financial Officer at EG.
Okay, sure. Thanks. So essentially, when I started off being an SME, Essence Group is, sort of embarking on a journey to, sort of having growth in its sort of top line and also in terms of profitability, along with, enhanced manufacturing capabilities at its Nowra facility. So we are actually looking at growing both organically and inorganically. So, the growth would be both, sort of enhancing its existing capabilities in-house and, through brand acquisition externally. With my role as CFO, obviously, there are a couple of things that are critical. Number one, with the organization growing at the rate at which it's growing now, it's important that we actually have a robust and sound ERP system in place. We currently do use SAP Business One, but we are actually looking at enhancing that capability, and hence moving into a more robust ERP system, and the likes of which, I think so we need in place over the next 2 to 3 years' time. So we are looking at using SAP S/4HANA, and we have actually commenced or rather embarked on that journey now. We are actually in the, I'd say, development or blueprint phase of the project. And we are looking at going live with the new ERP mid next year, so around May next 22.
That sounds exciting. It's going to be quite a journey. I look forward to hear some good news next year. Now, you have an experience as the CFO and financial controller for many other companies in the past, including in the MNC. And your role naturally included a wide range of finance management. So I'm curious to know, what are some of the areas that you have seen greater success through data analytics?
Data analytics is a very pivotal topic now, Jason, because, a lot of companies are actually looking at sort of enhancing their data governance, making sure that they have a robust ERP system in place to be able to not only sort of, catapult their growth trajectory, but also making sure that they have sound and sort of, robust internal controls over their financial reporting. When sort of people talk of internal controls or financial reporting, one very quickly talks about Sarbanes-Oxley in the US, sort of listed regime, or even in the UK, you have your sort of listing companies, which actually require to comply with the London Stock Exchange listing rules. Or in Japan, you look at JSOX, which is very similar to Sarbanes-Oxley compliance in the US. So from my perspective, I think so, when we talk of data governance, it's very key that we actually make sure that we understand what it is. Number one, making sure that the users of financial information and the users of business information know that the information or the data that they have in place is complete, it's accurate, and is reliable. How does one do that? The way one would do that is making sure that when you either embark on implementing a new ERP system, or if you have an existing ERP system which is quite robust, you make sure that the data that you have in play is actually complete and accurate. And for that to actually occur, you need to make sure that if there are any changes or some sort of enhancements that one makes to one's ERP system, there's a proper change management process that one adopts to making sure, the data that you've sort of, input, or the changes and the enhancements that you actually bring about to your ERP system are sort of adequately tested prior to it actually being put into the production environment. That's one aspect, I think, so of data governance. The other aspect would be when you're actually embarking on a new ERP implementation, how do you make sure that the data that you cut over from the old ERP through to your new ERP is complete and accurate? How have you validated that data? That's very, very critical, because without the data being complete and accurate, we all know that, even the best of ERPs would not, sort of achieve the objective that you would want it to achieve. So from that perspective, I think so in terms of data governance, when you embark on a journey to implement a new ERP system, making sure that your master data is complete, it's accurate, whether it's relevant, more importantly, because, many a times your legacy ERP system may have data which is not necessarily complete. You could have data that's only partially complete in the ERP, and then you could have an external data source, be it Excel or an Access database, where you'd sort of add additional information because your legacy ERP system just doesn't have the capability or the resource to have additional data sort of, captured within itself. So making sure when you transition over to your new ERP system, how do you make sure that the data, from the existing ERP system plus the the add-ons or the sort of incremental smaller systems that you have in play is brought into the new ERP system. So again, I think so it centers around making sure that the project manager in IT, finance, as well as the various other business sort of processes. It could be supply chain management, it could be a production and manufacturing side of things. It could also be items around quality management that you need to bring into the equation when you implement a new ERP system. How do you make sure that all of this is actually sort of aggregated and brought into the project management for your new ERP system implementation. That's all very critical.
Now, there is quite a lot of things to unwrap there. Speaking of the proper change management system, new ERP system, master data, and I really like you highlight that about the old ERP system, the new ERP system. Now, we're going to go into some of those in details in just a second. But my question for you, in the mid-sized business or in the organizations that you work at, do you think that data governance should sit in the corporate governance team or data analytics team? I think this is more from the strategic perspective that people would be curious to know.
It's a good question because, if you look at SMEs generally don't have a separate corporate governance function. So generally, the governance activities, of an SME are more likely than not handled by the finance team around the compliance aspects of an organization's existence. In terms of data governance, I think so. It's a mix of IT and finance. And I'll just come to sort of IT in a bit. But it's interesting because smaller organizations would generally not have a large IT department. It's just the nature of the beast, in the way the companies are structured. So you generally have an external ERP consultant or a firm that's, one would engage to actually manage, implement, in the case of a new ERP, or even, in terms of the day-to-day management, manage an ERP if there are any changes that are required. So, any change management for an existing ERP, that will be done by that external consultant or a firm that, one would engage, an ERP consulting or an advisory firm. So I think so in terms of data governance, ownership of, sort of data governance, that would more sit within the finance and IT team than any other function within an SME. When you then move and sort of, look at larger organizations, then you traditionally have a data governance function within the IT team. And in some instances, what happens is, that data governance function, they have a split line responsibility to, finance and IT. Yeah, but I just think it depends on the nature of the organization and the way it's structured. For us, for example, if I was to take my organization at Essence Group, I think so data governance would be more centered around finance.
Yeah, I agree with that. And on that note, how would you describe the most productive relationship between the finance team and the IT team as you are embarking to this new ERP system, while also ensuring the data governance are in place to make sure a smooth transition?
Sure, I think so. It is any organization, not just ours. The collaboration or the partnership between finance and IT is critical. Even in the roles that I've been sort of employed with in the past, both in Australia, India, and the UK, I think collaboration with IT was always paramount at the back of my mind, and that was something that I always believe is critical, because a lot of the work, a lot of the processes, the things that finance does is always very data hungry and data driven. If one doesn't really collaborate with the IT team, be it your in-house, IT team, or an external IT advisory or an sort of ERP firm that one engages, it will be very difficult for the finance function to actually operate effectively and efficiently, because you wouldn't really have the information that you need to be able to perform your tasks or your functions correctly, to be honest. So I think so collaboration and cooperation with IT is critical and paramount for finance, not just in an SME, but in any organization.
That is so true. Now, coming back to this new ERP system implementation, you spoke about the data in the old ERP system to new ERP system. And I think that is really important to highlight that, because sometimes, because of the differences of the old ERP system versus the new ERP system, you can never really have the data like for like. How do you have a data governance in place to make sure that as you move to the new ERP or the new environment, people could still make sense of the data coming from the old ERP system so that they can stitch the numbers to understand what are the sales or what are all the numbers over the years. And then there are some bump in that cutoff time, people will then understand that those bump or those outlier are caused by the change of the system.
It actually depends on how one implements an ERP, either be it an enhancement or, just a completely new ERP changing from one system to another. A couple of things to note here, sort of data validation in your old ERP system. Number two is when you're extracting the data, from your old ERP system for it to be validated, you've got to make sure that the relevant business process owners, be it finance, for the finance function related information. So your GL, your fixed assets, your AR, AP, all the open items, within your general ledger. Or if you look at, aspects of, sort of operational aspects, so things like, inventory management, procurement planning, sort of if you look at the sales side of the equation, you look at, your sales data, if you have any rebates in place, if you captured rebates, your customer rebates in your ERP. When we look at quality management, whether you have your QA related information within your ERP, each and every process or each and every function, I think so, the data that's extracted from your old ERP needs to be validated by your process heads or your process owners prior to it actually being transcribed or translated to be actually moved into your new ERP. Now, when it's moved into the new ERP system, obviously, you wouldn't have the data live. You'd obviously go through a proper change management system. So what you'd do is you'd actually test, sort of load your data into your test environment, make sure that, the users, the relevant business process heads and the users validate the data that's, sort of taken over or, sort of cut over from the old ERP into your new ERP. You test check, scenarios that, you would generally use on a daily basis, transactional and operational, making sure that the functionality of the new ERP is more, if not less than what your existing ERP is offering. Because that's what you want, because you never want to be going down the path where your new ERP system is only capable of offering sort of 90% of what your old ERP system, sort of actually did for you. And hence, in terms of, I'd sort of move away now from, the concept of data governance. And I think so I'd move into a broader concept of how you'd manage change in the ERP, how you manage the project, realistically. So making sure that the blueprint that's, sort of designed and that's actually approved by the relevant business process owners is sort of signed off. So you don't want to be, coming to a scenario where you come to a sort of test, you test your ERP, you test the data in the new ERP, and you only achieve 90% of what you were previously, sort of achieving in the old ERP. So making sure that the blueprint is signed off by the business prior to you doing any testing. So that is also very important. So when you talked of, sort of data governance and data management, I think so it's very important to make note of the fact that the blueprint that the business signs off on is as important, if not more important, than making sure that the actual data that you're cutting over from the old ERP is complete and accurate. So your business process blueprint sign-off is also a very, very critical process in the actual cutover from one ERP to another.
Speaking of this blueprint, what are the critical components that you think it should always be in there when it comes to the data governance as you are going through this new ERP system implementation?
I think so. Key aspects of any blueprint, especially around a new ERP implementation, you'd always capture your existing as-is requirements. And more importantly, you make sure because you only implement a new ERP system predominantly because your existing ERP is not capable of offering you the functionality that you'd wanted to achieve going forward. So making sure that you capture your to-be process, that is very, very critical. Making sure that each and every business head signs off on that to-be process. Also validating the process flow for the to-be process to make sure that the business collectively is in agreement that the to-be process would achieve a certain outcome, because many a times what one would see is that your to-be process may not necessarily achieve the outcome in the same manner in which your existing ERP is achieving. You would get the same end result, but your processes might be a bit different. But the transactions involved in the new ERP might be obviously a bit different to the current ERP, and that's again more around change management, educating the users of the new ERP of how one would achieve the end result, and making sure that you have adequate training in place for all the business process owners, the transactional heads, the transactional leads, and everyone who's actually engaged in the new ERP system, be it from a transactional processing perspective, be it from an sort of a governance perspective, or even from a transactional overview perspective.
Earlier on, you spoke about the external data and integrating the external data with the ERP data and subsequently maintaining the master data. Share with us the importance of the master data from the perspective of the finance and the CFO then.
Sure. Master data, I think, so it's again going back to your single source of truth. So I'd sort of give the analogy of what people would generally use back in the day of when we were doing computer programming. You have a concept of garbage in, garbage out. So if your master data is either incomplete or it's inaccurate, the information or the output that you'd get from your reports is again going to be dependent on the data that you have in place. So it's very important that we have a complete data set. When you're embarking on a journey of a new ERP implementation, if you're looking at consolidating various sources of information from various sources of truth, being from your existing ERP, or if you've had sort of systems in place, or even what is a system? Many times people say an Access database is a system, or a huge Excel database is an Excel spreadsheet is a system. Well, not really. It's just the way you capture information. Now, if you capture information in Excel, in the Access database, how do you make sure that you actually incorporate and capture all of it in the new ERP system? Well, the way you do that is making sure you capture all that information, you gather that during the requirements gathering stage, when you are on the path of embarking on a new ERP implementation, making sure that the relevant business process owners validate, test, and make sure that the information that you've collated from multiple sources of be it your ERP, be it Excel, be it Access, or even maybe a payroll system, for example. If you're integrating, a legacy payroll system into a new ERP system, bringing the HR functionality in-house, how do you make sure that the data is complete and accurate? So I think it's critical that the relevant business process owners validate the data set for their business process or for their function. They sign off on that as part of the blueprint sign-off. And then once the developers for the solution, they actually do the development work at the back end, and then they present a test database for the end users to do the testing. So you generally start off with doing unit testing by the actual developers to make sure that the system is doing what it is supposed to do for functional testing, and then you have your user acceptance testing, which is basically when the end user validates that the data that's there is accurate, is complete, and then you do your functional testing. So, the transactional testing for the likes of your AR modules, your accounts payable modules, fixed asset module, or even the general ledger. How do you make sure that, the users of financial information are happy that, the new ERP system is complete, it's doing what it's supposed to do? So I think it's very important to make sure that when you're extracting information from your legacy ERP system, coupled with various other sources that we've just talked about, making sure that the users who are going to be signing up on the blueprint are happy that this information that's going into your new ERP system is complete and accurate. If it isn't complete, then what one has got to do is obviously, you'd have to do a delta upload of the changes that are required to make sure that the data that you've captured in your new ERP system is complete.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts about the data governance in the process and experience of implementing the new ERP system. And coming back to your role as a CFO running the finance department, I'm curious to know how closely do you think the CFO should be working with your product management and marketing teams to ensure they are not only just focusing on what matters the most, but also for the future plans?
Sure. Sales and marketing. So, when you talk of sales and marketing and when you talk of finance, and I think so most finance leaders would, I think so, say that sales and marketing are critical to any business function, because if you don't have the sales, you don't have business. It's as simple as that. How do you make sure that you provide the sales and marketing teams, information that is accurate and it's reliable? If you have a single source of truth, and hence, I come back to the fact of having a robust ERP in play. You have a single source of truth. Most sales and marketing teams would generally rely on that ERP system. Now, if organizations are sophisticated enough and have the appetite to build or implement a business warehouse solution on top of their ERP system, then that's, I think, so something that what most sales and marketing functions would dream of, because then you don't really have the concept of multiple sources of information coming into place, be it your sales data, be it costing data. And then when we talk of costing, the sales team is always very, very, very critical of input margins that a business generates, which is what drives the bottom line. I think so. Hence, if you have a single source of truth within the ERP, and you build a business warehouse on top of that, if the business warehouse is integrated, so the BW system is integrated with the ERP, then the concept of reconciliation literally does not exist, because the source of truth is just one. It's then a matter of fact of giving the sales and the marketing teams the right tools or the reports for them to be able to slice and dice the information they need to make the informed decisions, giving them access to sales data, either by customer, either by sales channel, either, if you're having various, sort of export markets, sales markets, give them by the relevant sort of data cubes that they need the information by. So I think, again, providing the right information to the sales and marketing team is critical. And hence, I think if you have a robust ERP in play, coupled with an appropriate BW system, I think so that would take majority of the reconciliation work that would traditionally be involved with the finance team out of the equation.
Oh, that's good to hear. I think reconciliation is so important, especially with the ledger, to make sure all those numbers are right? My last question for you is, how would you as a CFO convince other leaders to involve and perhaps integrate the finance team in all sides of the business?
I think, the finance teams in most SMEs would be sort of well on top of other business functions within their business. So, when you talk of quality management, procurement, sales and marketing, I think so finance has to have a good understanding and oversight of those functions, because it's just the nature of the beast. In SME, a finance function in an SME needs to be heavily involved in providing the sales information, in providing margin information, as well as making sure that when you're procuring the product for manufacturing, you procure it at the right price, and making sure that the margins that the business generates, are sustainable for it to sort of, make the relevant EBIT numbers, to be honest. So it's, again, I think so a finance leader or a finance manager would need to make sure that he or she and his team would be well aware of what's going on within the sales and the marketing teams, as well as in the procurement side of the business and the operations.
Thank you for that. I have two final questions for you before we conclude this podcast interview. Number one, what is your most important first principle?
I think for me, as a finance leader or a finance process owner, what's important is, I think so, making sure that, you are accurate, you're methodical, and you're on top of your numbers. I think so that is again very critical because business is reliant on the information that you provide. So if you don't provide the right information, you could have in a scenario where you're not making the right decision, the business decision. So hence, I think so as a finance leader, it's critical that you provide the right information to business leaders. Again, in terms of data governance or as a governance leader, again, making sure that you're methodical in your approach. So methodical in the way you present things, methodical in the way you structure your day or you structure your workload, and methodical in the way you you approach various scenarios or business problems that are posed through to you.
What is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have?
I think Jack by Jack Welch is a book that I've read. I haven't really completed the book, to be honest, because it's very deep in terms of its depth. But that's something that I'd encourage viewers of this podcast to maybe have a go through. It's quite a heavy book, but as you mature, I think so, over your professional journey, you'd read that book and you'd realize that that's something that's relevant because at the end of the day, everyone wants to sort of advance professionally and advance. I don't mean in terms of, wealth creation, but also in terms of, advancing one's capabilities, skill sets. And I think so that book, it's a good book for one to read if one has the opportunity, the time, and the inclination to, read that kind of book.
He has written quite a few books. Were you referring to any particular one of them?
The name of the book is Jack by Jack Welch.
I will probably get the link of the book from you, but I can pass it on to the listener. Now, thank you so much, Malcolm, for coming and share with me about the importance of the data governance from the finance perspective and the CFO perspective. And especially hearing about how you are looking at it, especially you are implementing a new ERP system. So that was really, really good. Thank you so much, Malcolm.
Thanks a lot for your time, Jason. Thank you.